We continue with highlights of Foundations for Freedom with Greg Pinio.
Okay, the next case study I'd like to talk to you about is a classic acquisition and hold that we're going to call Phinney Ridge. A 1926 construction brick sixplex in a very romantic location right up on top of Phinney Ridge. Right near Red Mill Burger and Starbucks, and just a very eclectic part of town. Here sits this beautiful classic brick sixplex. I got a call from the owner of this building as a result of a letter that I sent them saying, I'm interested in buying this building. Please call me. I promise I won't waste your time. I got a call. This particular lady has owned this building for, just rounded off to saying, about 20 years. And her husband had passed away about a year prior. Now, she was not old by any means. Matter of fact, she was just barely over 50, and he was about the same age and died very suddenly. And the motivation for her was that he was a general contractor, and he did everything as far as the maintenance and the upkeep of this building. Her role was simply to help him. She did a certain amount of cleaning, a certain amount of painting and things, but he was really the one who managed this building in terms of its repairs and in terms of the major work it needed. And they worked on it together, but I think that there was a certain amount of intimidation now that he was gone of all that was involved in owning and managing this building. And so she called, and she's a very educated lady in terms of doing her research in the area. She knew what she felt this building was worth, and she was fairly clear that she wanted all cash for this building. In my inquiry with her about why she wanted all cash for this building, there wasn't a clear-cut reason for it. There was no clear-cut need for money. She didn't have a bunch of outstanding bills. She didn't want to take a trip around the world. She didn't have any pressing need. And so it opened a door to sort of inquire further about if she had researched her capital gain obligation. If she were to take all cash for this building, what would she pay? What is her basis? What would her effective gain be? She certainly didn't want to buy another building and exchange this into another. And so as we opened that door and began a discussion that started off on capital gains, it became pretty apparent to me and to her that there was more to know about this situation than she knew, and yet she didn't know where to turn or who to talk to get answers to these questions. I offered at that point prior to writing up any agreement, we sort of talked about a rough structure. We would come up with a purchase price. I would give her a very reasonable down payment, and then the balance of that I would make monthly payments on. In the form of a promissory note, it would be collateralized by a deed of trust on the subject property. She understood that general framework, but I could tell that I think a feeling in her that she's all alone and she really would like to make sure that she does the right thing here. And so what I offered to do was, at my expense, to set up an entire day of meetings. One with my accountant to talk about tax issues and how that works. One with my attorney to talk about whatever she wanted to talk about. One with my escrow person, one with my insurance person, and another with my banker to talk about basically just my resume. That's all it took. A day with her in those meetings, and we had lunch with one of these professionals midday, spent the day together. At that point, it was a very simple transaction. We wrote it up for $750,000, $150,000 down, $600,000 on a note secured by a first position deed of trust on the subject property. The property at the time I bought it had about $5,000 a month of rental income. And you're thinking like I am, boy, doesn't that make it worth $500,000 or $600,000? In this particular situation, the potential to raise that income significantly was so obvious to me. And I could tell that there was long-term benefit to just being involved with the seller, and so I wanted to give him the full extent of what I felt like I could. And that's what she said she wanted. And so, again, I gave a little on price, in my opinion. Down payment was solid. I mean, that's a lot down for me. That's 20% down. But again, I wanted to establish a relationship because I had a feeling this would get bigger and bigger. The building is as classic and beautiful as any building I've ever bought. 1,000 square foot, one-bedroom units, hardwood floors, which of course all were carpeted at the time I bought it. But it was just immaculately maintained. There literally was nothing to do when we bought it. I could see some issues down the road of things I would need to address. Plumbing issues that were fairly original, electric fuse boxes that were very original, certain things that I knew I'd need to address. But where I benefited from this sale, remember now, we're out there hunting for terms, is that the $600,000 note was written up at 6% interest, of course, with the maker-beneficiary agreement that I have the first right of refusal to purchase the note should she elect to sell note prior to maturity. Was written up on a 30-year amortized payments with a 15-year cash out. It also was written up that should I in the future want to substitute the collateral for this particular promissory note, that at my option I can do that so long as the equity and cash flow where I'm moving it has the ability to support the outstanding balance and the payment. Those terms are pretty powerful terms right there. So the deal closed. And because of the investment in relationship that I made and just the walking through this and being put in a position to just really make sure that she's taken care of and she's got good professionals. And I just invested a lot of personal time and energy to make sure that she knew she was well taken care of. About 2 months after we closed this transaction, I got a call, and she asked if I had a minute, had time for some lunch, some questions. And I said, absolutely. The bottom line is that as we sat down, she put in front of me a fairly sizable portfolio of other investments that she had. Stock market stuff mostly. Now, remember, old school people, hardworking people. She worked for 32 years for the Office of Social Security, right? That's a long time in one job, since she was 18 years old. Well, here she has a 6% interest income stream from a $600,000 note. Pretty substantial, $3,000 a month just interest coming in off of that note. And she's looking at a stock portfolio approximately the same size of principal value that is bringing her $0 a month, and the principal is being lost at 10 to 15% a month. She's not a math whiz, but she's looking at these two columns. She's putting a scale together and going, this $600,000 note is bringing me this much a month. This $600,000 of principal is keeping me awake at night. I'm stressed to the max. Every time I look at it, it's worth less, and I'm getting nothing per month out of it. Can you do something about this? Would you look at this portfolio of mine and see what can be done? Is there a way to turn this around? Well, it's very simple of how to do that. The biggest consideration was what sort of penalties for withdrawal are there on these other issues? And there were a couple that had penalties for withdrawal. So they were substantial enough that those couldn't be touched intelligently. At least initially, there was times that had to had to elapse before those could be unlocked. But a lot of the others could be. And for her peace of mind, this is not an active, aggressive, risk-taking investor that wants to buy, penny stock and, hope for the moon. This is someone who wants to retire and have an interest income stream. So we took a good portion of that portfolio and simply with that went to other buildings that I had, and instead of paying 7% on a bank note, I simply took X amount of money at 6% and refinanced that building, cashed out the bank note, and put her in first position on another property. And now instead of paying the bank, I'll pay you at 6%. Oh, changed her life. Changed her life. 180 degrees. And then all of a sudden, this leads to a relationship that's building and more getting to know each other. And as it turns out, there's all this extended family history of people that know each other, and a very, very interesting scenario. The point being is that when you treat somebody really, really well up front, and you're fair with them, and you're honest with them, and you're an open book with them, and you put them in front of the professionals, and you really are a professional in your own right to do it right, they will come back for more. And since then, more. And since then, more. And I would tell you that right now that every dime of this person's investment world is collateralized by pieces of my portfolio. And I can also tell you that together, as partners, we're building a vacation home in Arizona as we speak, because that's her passion and her dream is to have an Arizona vacation home. Well, it happened to be one of mine too. And she's such a trustworthy, hardworking person. We designed a home that is essentially like a duplex. It has 2 wings that are self-sustaining, and they share a common area, living room, dining room, kitchen, patio. But the 2 wings, so that's her wing, this is our wing. We share the middle, and she's just that wonderful a person. I think there's a philosophical principle here. It's an old one that we hear all the time, but we don't really think about too often. And I think that's simply this, that what goes around comes around. That when you extend yourself and when you help people sincerely, and when you are honest and honorable, and when you are thinking win-win about a transaction, and when your education actually benefits people in helping them make the right decisions about their financial planning, it will come back to you. It will come back to you. Okay? So, in that situation, that is about as simple of structures you could possibly get. Of a buy and keep. A fair purchase price, 20% down, but understand that the benefit of that transaction was in the terms. Building cash flows, I went in, I raised the rent on all of the units. We pulled up carpets, cleaned up the hardwood floors. They didn't even need sanding. And the gross rents of that building right now are at about $7,900 a month. I would put the value of that building at about $875,000 to $900,000, and I've had that building about 2.5 years now. So it's a good, solid, long-term hold. A home run, not in its face, but a home run in the terms and in the relationship that I have with this new investor and this new friend. So that's worth as much as any acquisition I've ever had. So that's the summary of that building. The tools that were employed on this Phinney Ridge project were fairly simple, and yet sometimes simple is beautiful. All right? A fair negotiated price. $150,000 down. And by the way, when you hear me put that much down, you have to know that what I'm doing to get that is by virtue of a line of credit that's associated with another one of my properties, or by virtue of refinancing another property to pull out some equity to put that money down. As you hold properties, a lot of them over a long period of time, your options increase of how to get that money. So never think of it as after-tax dollars in my bank account that I pulled out of my bank account and put down. Think of it as just more borrowed money. So essentially, I 100% finance everything I do. It's all borrowed money. The beauty here, though, is in the terms. A simple 6% note, 30-year amortization, 15-year cash out. Negotiated elements include a substitution of security clause. Huge. That's huge. And I also included in that substitution of security clause the ability to split the note into 2 or 3 notes. What that means is that I have $600,000 note. If I want to move that note to recollateralize it with a different property, I don't necessarily have to have a property that has $600,000 of equity to support the full amount of that note. I could take that note and split it into, let's say, 2 $300,000 notes and collateralize it by 2 different properties, each with $300,000 of equity in each one. Okay? So that's another tool that was used there. We made an inspection clause a part of this transaction simply to do a thorough walkthrough. That was almost not needed in this case. The building was so immaculate. But I wanted to see each unit, and I wanted to see the rental agreements. No problem there. Those are about all the tools that were used in this transaction. Very simple, very straightforward. What's come of that transaction, though, is somewhat complex, which really turned out to be a full analysis of this person's total financial life and replacing hundreds of thousands of dollars of her investor dollars to different portfolios, different acquisitions, working with her on her tax needs, write-off needs that she has. And there's all kinds of ways we've gone at that. But that door opened only as a result of fair negotiation on the Phinney Ridge acquisition. If you hunt long enough, if you're out in the woods long enough, at some point, the big one is going to walk in front of you. Usually that happens when you are least able, least ready, and least willing to take on any project of this magnitude. This is our next case study, and for purposes of this discussion, let's call it the Edgar property. I have written letters to this particular owner for 15 years, wanting to buy this property. It is a very simple property, but so rare in so many ways. As it happened, the owner of this property died. It was handed to the estate people that were handling his property. The attorney for the estate got the property appraised. And as part of this whole package that the attorney was given on this property, the seller happened to had a file on the property. The person who died had this file, and in that file was 15 years of letters from me saying, I want to buy this property from you. As a result of that, I will probably never forget the day that this attorney calls, introduces herself, and lays out the opportunity to be the first one to get to buy this piece of property. Now, what this property is, the reason it's unusual, is it's in the East Lake area of Seattle. It has 120 feet of waterfront looking straight west across the lake towards Gasworks Park, towards Queen Anne, has an unobstructable 180-degree view of the water, Lake Union, Gasworks Park, Queen Anne Hill, Aurora Bridge, the Olympic Mountains, and actually to the south picks up a lot of downtown and the Space Needle and everything. It's just a really unique setting. Edgar Street comes down off of East Lake and dead ends at this building. And Fairview, coming from the north, dead ends heading south at this property. And so there's no road traffic in front of this building whatsoever, or even on the side of the building, either side of the building. It's private. Its setting is a 50 on a scale of 1 to 10. There are 8 boat slips out front that are a part of the property. And this is a 1958 ugly box of a building. And when I bought it, there were 11 units, a 2-bedroom penthouse unit on the top floor of the building, and 10 small 1-bedroom units on the 2 stories below that. Very small, 600 plus square feet in each unit, great big patios out front, decks out front, and just the most perfect setting for any rental property in all of Seattle. Well, the conversation went a little like this. I got this call from this attorney that said, Mr. Pineo, I am the attorney handling the sale of this property. The reason I'm calling you is that you have written letters to the deceased seller for a long, long time. Do you have a pencil handy, sir? And I said, yeah, I do. He says, write this down. This is about 10 o'clock in the morning. And I'm actually in the car with my wife, and I pull off the side of the road, and she says, well, here it is. The price is $1,600,000. The terms, all cash. Closing needs to happen in 25 days. I need a standard form, PISML, commercial form, purchase and sale agreement written. There are no contingencies, and I need $100,000 non-refundable earnest money in my office by 5 o'clock. If I have all of that, you're first in line and good luck. I hope you close it. If I don't, at 5:01, I will be calling the next person on the list, giving them the same opportunity. Having the gross rents will not help you. I don't really know what they are, she said, but they're pathetically low. What I can tell you is that they're all on month-to-month rental agreements. There are no leases in place. And so that's about all I can tell you. Anything else about the building, I really don't know. Feel free to walk around the building. If you get arrested, that's your business. There it is. Here's my name. Here's my office address. Do you have any questions whatsoever? I went, boy, is there any room to negotiate any of this? No, absolutely not. None. Zero. I went, okay. Well, I hope to see you by 5. We did a U-turn. We drove down to the building. Of course, I knew right where it was. We walked around the building. 1958 walk-up box of a building. Ugly in every way, shape, and form. On the most prime time L3 zoned piece of Seattle real estate going. Period. Evidently, there were permits that the previous owner had received or were ready to pick up for brand new docks. The docks that were sitting there at the time I looked at it were in deep trouble. They were sinking and rotting, and they were in real bad shape. But they had permits ready to pick up for new docks, brand new docks, all approved. So we looked at this. I weaseled my way into a couple units. I forget what I told the tenants that I was, but I was inspecting something. I don't know, maybe I was the cable man. I forget. But I got into a couple units to just see what they looked like, and they were gross. I mean, green shag carpet, and yet I could tell there were hardwood floors under them. Small units, not well taken care of at all. Needed painting, needed this, needed that. Building itself looked like it hadn't been taken care of very well at all. There was a parking lot down below that was kind of a free-for-all of cars, no lines, no anything. There were 9 carports kind of underneath the building that were just kind of a first-come, first-serve, and then an entire basement of this building that was just a free-for-all of whatever anybody wanted to leave over the last 30 years. Just garbage, 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 garbage. But I could see that this had potential to be one of the best acquisitions of my career. It's just how do you do it? And so it didn't take a brain surgeon to look at this and see that with $3,000 or $4,000 coming in a month, which means a value of this $400,000 or $500,000 of value based on the income approach, how do I get from there to $1.6 million? No bank on the planet is going to touch this thing. The tax-assessed value at the time I bought it was right at about $1.2 million. And so there I was, sitting in this place of going, all right, I see the potential here. I know that down the road but how do I do it? And you have to know that my life at that moment was just on overload. And I really credit my wife, and this is the philosophical lesson of this, that as we're driving away and I'm thinking, there's just no way to pull this off. I mean, I know the mechanics of real estate so well, and in 25 days, there is no way. I just don't see how it can be done. I have no energy. Our funds are tied up, blah, blah, blah. And she said to me, Greg, listen, we will drive by the Roanoke exit for the rest of our life and regret it if we don't try. If we put down $100,000 and lose it because we couldn't figure out a way to close it, we can live with that. We can live with that. That's not going to have a long-term effect because at least we will have tried. But if we don't try, it will eat at you and me for the rest of our lives. You've been at this your entire life. You know that this is the bird of birds. This is the one you've been waiting for. You got to at least try. And I probably will never forget that. It's a philosophy of living without regret. And by 4:50 that afternoon, we were at that attorney's office with a purchase and sale agreement written, signed, with a cashier's check for $100,000. I walked out of that office and went, well, this should be an interesting next 3 weeks because we're going to give it a try. And to be honest with you, I thought our chances were about 1 in 100 of being able to do it. I put every game plan I've ever had up my sleeve in motion at that time simultaneously. I called my banker. I named off 6 or 7 properties and said, I need to process a refinance on all of these properties immediately and pull out as much cash as we can possibly pull out of these properties by virtue of a refinance. I'm taking notes that could be moved and freeing up properties, moving them into second positions here, there, and everywhere to free up properties so I could refinance properties and pull out money. And every real estate tool I owned was out of the toolbox working hard. I applied for a first position, what amounted to be a hard money loan from a local lender. It was a 1-year loan. The first 6 months of the loan was at 9% interest with no fees. But if it went to month 7 and they were not cashed out, I was charged 5 points and 13% interest. So I had a game plan that I was not going to let that go to month 7. I was going to get in, do what I was going to do, get a rent roll up, and then refinance. That was my game plan. Out of that hard money loan, I was able to collect $900,000 of hard money loan. And out of all of the refinances that we did at the same time, put $700,000 down on that property. And you know what? On the day of closing, we were able to simultaneously wrap up all of those refinances, the acquisition loan, and closed it on the exact day it had to close. The attorney promised me that if I were even an hour late, that there would be no extensions granted, and she would gladly take my $100,000 and go to number 2 on the list. And I believed her. There was no doubt in my mind she was not kidding. But we were able to wrap it up and close it. And for a lot of reasons, that was probably one of the best things that's ever happened. It was a time in my life where going to a job site and just working hard was a real good thing. And but it took a huge effort, and I credit one banker in particular that I've worked with for years and years to pull off all of those refinances simultaneously in such a short time frame was a miraculous feat. And yet it was done. So we closed that building. My next step, it's not like the stress ends there. The next step is to give 11 tenants the notice that, hi, I'm the new owner. Oh, and by the way, you've all been here, I know, for on the average 25 years at this building. Of course, who would move if your rent was $200 or $300 a month for a waterfront apartment in Seattle? But I'm the new owner. I just paid a horrific amount of money for this property, and now I'm going to set the rents of this building at what I believe market value is. Your current rent is $250 a month. 30 days from now, if you would like to stay on as a tenant, your new rent is $9.95 a month. If you would like a parking space, I will have covered parking spaces available at $75, uncovered available at $50, and if you would like to tie your boat up to a boat slip, it would be $300. I will have storage lockers available in what is now a cluttered basement full of garbage. Those storage lockers will be done and available for you in 30 days at the rate of $75. Well, not only did they all move, they formed what officially became known as the Edgar Street Tenants Coalition, and along with the Tenants Union, contacted every radio and TV station in Seattle. And we were on every news channel for about 4 nights in a row at what evil investors, landlords we are to give everybody such a horrific rent raise. And my stance then is the same as my stance now, that I'm an investor. I'm not a charitable nonprofit corporation that is focused on providing low-income housing for people. I just paid $1.6 million for this building. I have to get rents at market to pay my mortgage payment, period. They should be thanking their lucky stars for the last 25 years of low rent. That's my attitude. And of course, if they want to pay market rent, I'd be happy to let them stay. Well, this is where landlord-tenant law changed overnight. They screamed and yelled so loud that city council met and changed the law that if you raise rent more than 10%, you need to give tenants 60 days notice. But of course, I was grandfathered in to the old one, and in 30 days, they all moved, except one stayed there, I think, another 2 months, and then he moved. But interestingly, and sort of humorously in this equation, that as they were interviewing me on Channel 4 or 5 or 7, I forget which one, they were quizzing me on, so you're going to do what to this building? I said, really, I'm just going to paint them. I'm going to refinish the hardwood floors, and I'm going to re-rent them. They'll be ready to move in 40 days from now. Ready. And so what are you going to rent them for? I'm going to rent them for around $9.95. And to me, now I'm saying this on, news, $9.95. And to me, $9.95 for a waterfront 1-bedroom unit in the most prime time location in Seattle with the ability to have secure parking, park your boat right out in front of your unit, look west at the sunsets and the lake. I don't think that's too bad of a deal, to be honest with you. And if you're interested, if you want one of these units, here's my phone number. And I gave my phone number. Well, that was the cheapest ad I ever ran in my life. My phone was ringing off the hook, and it was all about people interested. The following Saturday, I said, if you're interested in a unit, come down to the parking lot. I'll have one finished, and I'll be able to show you through, and you can reserve your spot. And in about a 2-hour period on the following Saturday, I rented the entire building. A to Z. All of them. Now my job was just to get the units ready because I was committed with people moving in at incremental times. I had a lot of work to do. And I worked my butt off. I did that entire project myself. All the floors, all the painting, all the fix-it, all the everything. I built a security gate and a fence and got permits. We put in the new docks. We were really working. So 90 days after I bought it, this pathetic rent roll of $3,000 or $4,000 a month was now $18,750, which at the time would justify a value of about $2.1 million. I have since turned down offers on that building within the first year I owned it in excess of $3 million for the building. And I have no interest in selling that building. Matter of fact, in the selling world, that would be the last thing I would ever sell, is that building. I remodeled the top floor and was able to put a small office in on the top floor, turned the big 2-bedroom unit into a nice size 1-bedroom and was able to put an office in, remodeled it completely. So my office was there, still is there, but soon to be moved to another location. All of the basement, we put in 22 storage rooms in the basement that rent for $75 a month. The covered parking rents for $75. The uncovered parking rents for $50. And then the units on the average are $995. The top floor, the big 1-bedroom on the top floor rents for $1,600 a month. And now my little office that I'm moving out of here in a couple of weeks has rented for an additional $1,600 a month. So once I move out, the gross rents on that building will be well over $20,000 a month. A great acquisition. The tools that were employed to pull this one off, right out of the chute, I had to come up with $100,000 non-refundable earnest money. Well, that was done by a home equity line of credit. I have a line of credit attached to my home, and we just took the risk. We wrote the check, went down there, having no clue if we could pull this off, only that we were going to try and live without regret. And so, step one, we had an already established working line of credit, which if you have a home and you don't have a home equity line of credit established on that home, you should. Matter of fact, line of credits in general, you should have established and ready for your use. Sometimes a bird flies up and you don't have 3 weeks to get your funds together. Here's case in point. It had to be ready and available right now. From there, it was all a bunch of financing, a whole bunch of financing. A hard money loan. Well, you can bet that as I got that new rent roll, immediately, when that building was full and rented, immediately I was applying to refinance, not only to recapitalize some of my cash that I have into this, but to beat that month 7 ugly hard money first position loan. And that refinance processed easily with new, well-written leases and a real sharp-looking building and a unique location. And so we beat that no problem. Refinanced out of that, and then I was able to recapitalize. So it actually worked out well. I refinanced a lot of buildings, put a whole bunch of cash down, but then on the refinance was able to get most of my cash back that I put down, and a lot of it that I put into the building was able to get that back by virtue of a refinance. So that was good. From that point, it's just been following through with the permits that were issued. I was able to negotiate that a portion of what it costs to build the docks would be paid by the seller. And that the seller, if I was able to close on time, that the seller's estate would set aside $75,000 to contribute towards the cost of the docks. So it's kind of like a bonus for actually closing this. And I negotiated that, and we did close on time. Therefore, they paid $75,000 towards the cost of the new docks. And the new docks essentially cost that much for the docks. I've since spent some more money on them, putting power and water down to the docks, but the initial cost of the docks was actually built into the transaction. So that was good. Following through with the permit. You never want to let a permit like that expire, especially a shoreline permit. They're so hard to get that letting it expire would just be a crime. So followed through with that. From there, it's the principles of expandability kicked in. Expandability is changing the picture. And simply changing the rent roll, obviously I needed to change the units, the way they looked, to change the rent roll. And then also, we built this security gate and fence which blocked off the whole parking lot and made it a real marketable item all by itself. Right in front of this building are many, many, many beautiful, very, very expensive houseboats on each side, left and right, with this water aisleway looking right out to the lake. These houseboats don't have any place to park, nor do they have any place to store anything. So as part of the expandability of this, selling the parking, selling the storage, having built-in clients there was a big part of the equation. Even if my tenants didn't want to rent the parking or the storage, I could go outside the fence, if you will, to sell parking and storage to the adjacent property owners, and I knew there would be a market for that, which there's a waiting list for both of those things, both parking and storage. So that was a big part of the equation of the cash flow to rent parking, rent storage, and rent the moorage. We have 9 moorage slips at $300 a piece. That's another significant part of the cash flow of this building. So that was a good project. Stressful in every way, shape, and form. Landlord-tenant law certainly was something I needed to understand intimately going into this, because every bit of what I did on this project was challenged by the tenants who were there. And to be perfectly honest, I don't feel good about giving somebody a notice who's been there 30 years and paying $250 a month to say, hi, guess what? Your new rent's $995. There's no way that could feel good to anybody. However, this is not personal. It's business, and I'm an investor. I've got a mortgage to pay. And the only way to do it is to get market value rents out of the buildings. If your skin is not quite that thick, you better avoid those opportunities whereby raising the rent in big fashion is part of what needs to be done. Because it's never going to feel good, nor will anybody ever be happy. What makes you feel better is the new tenants coming in who are absolutely ecstatic about an opportunity to live in this type of building with this type of view. That makes you feel better. It's like, well, some people are leaving, but I'm giving other people an opportunity to live there. The next case study I'd like to go through, I hope will be inspiring to you, because it was just a couple months ago that this deal was done. I get told all the time that things have so changed out there that you just can't find good deals anymore. Values are so crazy, and this is so high, and for this reason and that reason, they're just not out there anymore. And I actually love it when I hear that, because it just means that less people are looking. And so, the field is all mine to hunt. But I hope this is inspiring to you to get out of the car and start hunting yourself, because this particular deal, we'll call this the Franklin Avenue East deal. Also, right there in the East Lake area of Seattle. Matter of fact, about 3.5 blocks from the last case study, they're on Edgar. This is an absolutely gorgeous 1926 construction brick 6-unit. 2 low, 2 middle, 2 up. 1,400 square foot 1-bedroom units. Absolutely spectacular in its maintenance, its look from the street, its appeal, all of the old world charm you could possibly imagine. Mahogany doors, mahogany woodwork, oak floors, coved ceilings, leaded glass windows, and it's just been impeccably maintained all of the years. Really what it has been, not not so much impeccably maintained is that the entire population of the building has lived there for the better part of the last 40 years. So there's not a lot of moving in and moving out, a lot of wear and tear on the building because of people moving in and moving out. A very stable tenant base. There are 5 detached garages on the alley side, connected but separated. So a detached 5-bay garage on the alley side, a laundry room, and then a storage room so that each tenant has their own storage locker as well. These units have 3 huge walk-in closets, large dining room, large living room, just spacious units. The building is a radiant hot water heating system so that as the landlord, I pay for the water, the sewer, the garbage, and the radiant hot water heat, and their hot water for their showers, baths, etc. So a utility package that is really good for the tenant that certainly needs to be factored in when we're out there renting these units. The situation for this is, again, a simple response to a very direct inquiry. This one was a very direct letter that I wrote, the owners of this building, simply personally identifying this building because it's so beautiful and so well located that if they, just a personal letter that said, I really would love an opportunity to buy this building from you, should you have any interest at all in selling. And they called. Now the sellers in this case, who they were and their personal situation is what unlocked the terms of this particular transaction. That's usually the case, and certainly in this situation it is. One of the owners, there were 2 owners that owned it 50-50 each. One of the owners was in her early 80s, and she had lived in her unit in the building since the early 1940s. So if you can do the math, she was in her 20s, early 20s when she moved in and has lived in her unit ever since. That's a long time. And imagine what she has seen. I mean, she lived through World War II while living in this unit. That's a little weird, but that's the truth. She co-owned this building with her sister at the time. Her sister was a little bit older than her, and they bought this building when they were in their early 20s. Her sister died about 10 years ago and willed her 50% to her son. And so current ownership is a lady who's in her early 80s and her nephew, who is in his early 50s. So, very different sellers at very different places of their lives with very different needs. They owed approximately $100,000 on the building. They wanted to sell, mainly because the seller, who's in her early 80s, lived on a top floor unit and the stairs had become too much, and they needed to get her moving on towards a care facility. That was their motivation for selling. They had had a couple other people look at the building. They had a sense of what they wanted for the building. I simply asked them what their best offer was on the building, if they'd received any offers, and they said yes, they had received an offer, and that somebody in the area was willing to pay around $900,000 for the building. From that point, I said, well, if I were to offer you $925,000 for the building, could we go from here to my office and start working on writing that up? And they had no objection to that at all. They were definitely sellers. They weren't just thinking about it. They wanted to sell. They had their mind set on selling. And so there it began. Now, again, understand that you've got 2 very different sellers. Now, the older lady had a very, very close friend of hers who was in her mid-50s, a very educated woman who is a stockbroker, who very articulate in finance and was basically taking care of her financial affairs. I set up 2 separate meetings. The only thing we had to agree on for both sellers was the purchase price. Beyond that, I treated them as 2 separate sellers. If we agree on $925,000, they owe $100,000. They're paying their closing costs of approximately $25,000 to sell this building, state excise tax, title escrow. After all is said and done, there is approximately $800,000 left, $400,000 to the young nephew, $400,000 to the older lady. Okay? Kind of figure how that works. And so I approached them separately. The nephew wanted all cash for his portion, had to have all cash, and actually wanted to do a 1031 to reinvest all of that cash in a property of equal or greater value closer to where he lived. He lived over in West Seattle. And he wanted all cash. Younger guy, all cash, no negotiating. When I met with the older lady and her, let's just call her her financial planner, the story was very different. There was no need on that side for all cash. There was certainly a need for some cash because of the cost of setting up her move and her care facility. She had other investments that provided her an income stream. And so what they really wanted was an income stream to just pay her monthly expenses and to essentially defer a good portion of her capital gain by virtue of an installment sale. And in this situation, to hopefully defer it indefinitely and let her sort of pass away, having not paid that capital gain bill, and then at that point to name co-beneficiaries on the note who would absorb her position should she pass away and take it down the road from there. And so what we agreed on with her portion of the net proceeds was that I would give her $150,000 in the form of cash and $250,000 in the form of a promissory note. And that promissory note would be collateralized by a second deed of trust on a different building. Well, let's just be specific. Do you remember the Edgar transaction with its newfound equity and cash flow? Let's move her over there in second position because there's plenty of cash flow and plenty of equity to support $250,000 of debt. So that's how we wrote it up. $250,000 at 6%, interest only or more payments, substitution of security to another property. Maker of note has first right of refusal to purchase note should beneficiary elect to sell note prior to maturity. Named additional beneficiaries along with her on the note, and there provides the structure for this transaction. Okay, so let's add it all up. They need $100,000 to cash out their underlying. The one seller gets $400,000. That's $5. I've got to give $150,000 down to the older seller. That's $650. And then $25,000 of their closing costs. So of the entire transaction of $925,000, $250,000 is going to be in the form of a note. The balance of that is going to have to be from the proceeds of a new loan. And that's exactly what I did. I simply applied for a new loan. The new lender would lend 75% loan to the value of the building. Well, the building is worth $925. That's what I just paid. So they're going to lend 75%. That actually came out to be more than I needed for my cash requirements at closing. And I actually walked out of that transaction after paying my closing costs, not using any real money, with $5,000 in my hand, a new property, a new first position loan, 75% loan to value loan on the subject property, and a second deed of trust secured by Edgar Street. That's how it unfolded. 4 of the units, in addition to the unit that the seller lived in, so 5 total units, were occupied by tenants who had been there almost as long as she had. And I told her that rents would be drastically changing upon closing, and she completely understood. She knew her rents were really low, but just did not have the heart to raise the rent on these people who had been there forever. They were friends of hers. They lived in the same building with her. And so I asked her if she couldn't get the word out that she sold the building and that here's the closing day and that these people might want to start looking for some new place. And every one of them went and found new places to live and was out of there before the closing day. That left me one tenant in the building who the only reason she re-rented that unit is that a prior tenant died in that unit. One of her friends as well passed away, moved her stuff out, and then she re-rented it about 2 years prior. So this tenant was in there at least reasonable rent, but certainly not market rent. And so really all I had to do at closing was to give them a notice that their rent had changed from $775 to $995. Not a drastic rent increase, but certainly a rent increase. And then the rest of the units, 5 were vacant at closing. And so I was able to very quickly with my crew go in, pull carpets, clean floors, sanded some hardwood floors, paint all the units, clean all the units. We were in and out of 5 units in a week and a half. Worked very hard, 3 of us. And then I put them up for rent, and within 30 days, they were all rented. Rental income on the building, I have the 2 lower floor units at $995, the 2 middle floor units at $1195, and the 2 top floor units at $1295. I have 5 garages rented for $150 each. I've got coin-operated laundry in there of my own laundry right now, throwing out about $300 a month. And that's the gross rent picture of the building. That gross rent picture pays for my first position mortgage on the subject property, principal and interest, my second deed of trust on the other building, my taxes, my insurance, my maintenance, my utilities, and still throws off a positive cash flow of over $1,000 a month with no money out of my pocket and actually money in my pocket at closing. Now, people that say these things aren't out there simply aren't looking. That's all there is to it. And yet looking is prefaced by the kind of eyeglasses you look through. The more fluent you become in the tools of real estate and how to structure transactions, the more your vision increases. You're able to see a way to do something. You're knowing the market. You're knowing potentials. And so it's no mystery that you can do these sorts of things if you go looking with that sort of toolbox. Tools employed. Franklin, a new first position loan on the subject property. A second deed of trust secured by a different piece of property. Interest only or more on the promissory note. Co-beneficiaries on the promissory note. A simple rehab on the building. A simple re-rent. Fairly simple. Again, understanding that some of the best transactions you'll ever do are fairly simple. I want to underline one part of this transaction that I feel really good about. It was my initiative to really, really push the older lady to name co-beneficiaries. Hadn't really thought of who she might want to leave the outstanding balance of this note to should something happen to her and her health fail. She was in great health. We bought this. But I really insisted that she think in those terms, give it a lot of hard thought, and let's make sure at closing we type in there co-beneficiaries, just should something happen. And they agreed that that was a good idea to do, and they did, and they gave 3 separate co-beneficiaries in equal parts to share in the income stream and ultimately the cash out on that note amount should something happen to her. 2 months after closing, the older of the two sellers passed away. And now I pay the 3 co-beneficiaries on a monthly basis. And that balloon payment was set up to be 10 years following her passing away. So we actually set a cash out post her passing away. At an unknown, nobody knows when they're going to go, but 10 years following that, all outstanding principal is due and payable. In that 10-year period, they receive monthly payments on their promissory note. Well, it just so happens that not even 60 days after closing, she passed away. And so that sort of planning is really important. And you never know when that's going to happen. And when you're dealing with older people, really encourage them to get their affairs in order because it's just the right thing to do. Now she knows that who she wanted to get those funds. It wasn't left in the hands of an attorney. It wasn't have to be interpreted in a will. Some people don't even have wills. Consequently, then the state says, here's what's going to happen. This is the way to handle it so that she is letting people benefit from her hard work and effort and that it never misses a beat. So that is the Franklin transaction.
Thank you for listening to Foundations for Freedom with Greg Pinio. For more information on this or other Reach Returns productions, please contact us at reachreturns.com or call Reach Returns at 206-550-4242. The information on these discs is copyrighted 2003, all rights reserved.